Welcome to NFT Rebels, the podcast where technology, creativity, education, and non-fungible experiences meet each other. It's me, Annie Alexander, and in each episode, me and the Rebels will have a real unscripted talk, share genuine opinions, and show raw emotions. Should we start? Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the NFT Rebels. Hi, Sam Simmons is with me in the studio. Welcome, Sam. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Fine. We were just having a short chat before we went live, and I was just saying that recently I started looking for my guests in the good old LinkedIn, and that's basically where I discovered Sam. Probably you know this too, like when someone has a podcast or a website or whatever, you end up getting loads of pitches of people who want to become guests. And the way I look at this is because I'm very protective of my audience. I usually just, I just go and approach people that I've noticed myself online. I think I would vibe with, and I think they would bring value to the audience. And I just, so I usually don't look into cold pitches. I go out and look for people, and it feels like LinkedIn. I went back to LinkedIn and looking around, and there are pretty good Web3 sort of content creators in there and Web3 talent around, so that I'm rediscovering at the moment. So yeah, Sam, welcome. I'm very happy that I found you there, and welcome to the NFT Rebels.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's an interesting sort of juxtaposition between, we talked about like LinkedIn versus Twitter. LinkedIn, very building focused. I think Twitter, there's I guess a greater sense of anonymity there, and a lot to weed through sometimes. So I certainly think you're looking at the right place, and I appreciate you coming across my profile and thinking enough about me to have me on. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, it's really cool that we found each other, and I think for discoverability for the people in the space, it's also a good place because it's not so crowded, it's not so loud. So if a person is in the field and is creating content, or is interested in the subject and wants to actually connect and create genuine relationships, I feel like the chances will be higher on LinkedIn as well compared to Twitter. I don't know. I mean, Twitter
couldn't
has
agree
been
more.
a bit. Okay, cool. So let's dive in and just start from the beginning. Sam Simmons is in Web3 full time. So what is he doing?
That is a great question. Some days I wake up and I don't even know myself. A little bit of everything is the answer. To word vomit my background a little bit and kind of catch us up to where we are today. My most extensive experience is in streaming media. So I worked with and went on to run a poker content production company called Poker Go. We produced, distributed, streamed about 100 plus different live poker events on an annual basis, everything from World Series of Poker, high stakes poker, and lots of others. All the while, I was investing in some different projects, and I say projects very loosely because there are more Web2 businesses. I'm just so used to saying projects now, and kind of dabbling in different stuff. Took a couple years off, and ended up going to do some consulting and advisory for a couple of the businesses that I had invested in previously, and started dabbling in crypto and got a little bit crypto curious. I had gotten into investing in Bitcoin, Ethereum, and so on around 2017, 2018. Like a lot of other people, I think it was early 18 or 19, I forget, when everyone kind of got shellacked when the early bubble burst, and wrote it off at that point in time.
I never crypto winter. Yeah,
exactly. I think I managed to just like nail the top. I was the top signal. So kind of I lost the glamour in investing in that space, and I never really took the time to learn, how the technology of cryptography worked and what made the technology so special. It was just, check Bitcoin price, it goes up, I'm happy, it goes down, I'm not happy. And around that time, I was pretty unhappy. And so took a couple years off, and around early 2020, around when the pandemic hit, kind of started getting back into it. It timed well with a nice little upswing, and then naturally, as price goes up, I start getting more interest, got more into it, but all the while, it was very passive, and that all changed when I discovered NFTs. And I think what was so fascinating for me about getting into this space was the psychology that came with participation and everything around the communities, the like-mindedness of finding people that you identify with, both having a sort of verifiably unique identity while also being part of a larger collective in the form of that community, I think was really special. And I degened into it about as aggressively as you can, buy first, research later. But what was most notable to me is unlike buying Bitcoin and other types of assets like that, it made me feel something. Like I felt like I was a part of something bigger than myself, and that really was fascinating to me, honestly. And that's what really got me to look under the hood and say, okay, what's going on with this? I need to make up for lost time, get caught up to speed. So I basically spent the middle part of last year doing just that. And then late last year, basically said, look, I don't know what I'm going to end up doing in this space, but I know I'm going to be in it in some way. So that's where I am today. Is basically I created this pseudo project, and the project is just me, called Non-Fungible Ventures, which does consulting, advisory, and investing. And in particular, I'm working with a couple projects, most primarily NFT Stadium is one of them. I'm currently consulting chief strategy officer for that organization. We do fandom-driven NFT experiences for sports, gaming, music, and entertainment. And then we're actually launching our first collection a couple weeks from now, still kind of a moving time frame. But for Poker Go, my former employer, so creating fandom experiences around poker and viewing and playing and so on. So it's all really exciting. And then I'm doing some separate investing and a few more like protocol platform based projects as well. So definitely keeping busy is the short answer to the question.
Nice. Yeah, it's interesting you said about that, unlike Bitcoin, you actually in this space, when you buy stuff, you actually feel something. And it just reminded me that I think about a year ago, I interviewed Dima Buterin, who is the father of Vitalik from Ethereum. And he was talking about something that was very interesting. Vitalik back then, during the annual Ethereum report to the community, had stated something that along the lines that a project needs to have a soul. And I feel like in this space, probably NFTs are actually the subcategory which basically has that soul, and because there's loads of emotions related to it. It's not just a token, right? It's way more than a token. So in that sense, it's just when you said you felt something, I just recalled that statement. You mentioned poker several times. Do you see any parallels between poker and the NFT game?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably what I found most engaging about the space early on, in the wheeling and dealing type nature of some of the activities that can take place, whether it's like sweating a reveal, degenning into a mint, going, measuring expected value across different outcomes of different projects and so on. It's a lot of, it only comes back to risk analysis. So I've cut my teeth for a number of years in the poker space. I do a lot of like fantasy sports as well, a little bit of sports betting here and there. So there's a lot of psychology that goes into those games and activities that I think parallels so nicely into the NFT space, more on like the individual project investing side. But yeah, it was an easy transition. Let's just say that.
Got it. Yeah, got it. So, I think like we're gonna talk about the NFT revolution. So basically, let's just maybe let's start by comparing like this field with like the Web2 space, and then going into this space and look into the different aspects of it, because it's so hard to talk about this space as one big thing, because there are so many different things inside it, right? You can't really talk the same way about collectibles versus one-on-one artists versus projects that are massive big projects that have NFTs as part of their business, for example, so Web 2 and Web 3, obviously, like, apart from the obvious decentralization idea, apart from the idea that, basically all of us came in here because just like the top title of the podcast, right? We at its nature, I feel like all Web3 people are rebels, right? To some extent. So apart from that, when you're getting into this space, what do you think is the biggest difference in terms of I don't know, I mean, working in Web 2, working in Web 3, like there is a massive difference. What was the thing that actually kind of caught your eyes and sort of was that one thing that was like, oh my god, like this is completely different?
I'm trying to consolidate my thoughts into a simple answer because as you know, this could go so many different directions, and I could probably spend the rest of the podcast just answering that one question. I think what I was thinking, as you said earlier, around buying an NFT and feeling something. I think yes, you could have a technical definition of what an NFT is as a non-fungible token, and it's a verifiable, provably scarce, immutable, whatever else. To me, NFTs are about building connections, and those connections span across so many different spaces, I guess is the right word. Not only between, because a lot of the work I do, I strategically have jerseys behind me because it's a lot of what I do is in the realm of fandom and creating fandom experiences. So if you think about teams and athletes, artists, musicians as brands, historically in Web 2, it's very much been a one-way conversation. If I'm a brand, I'm selling something to a consumer through the supply chain or whatever the sort of steps to in the marketing funnel may look like. And yeah, that person buys it, but that's basically the end of the relationship where, they buy my jersey, they buy my t-shirt, they go out and enjoy that. We've done that value exchange, wipe hands clean. We'll see you when we do some remarketing and try to capture you again for a future transaction. Web3 flips that script entirely, and it not only creates a two-way conversation between brand and consumer, but it creates conversations between consumers and consumers, which I think there's a lot of value in alone, in finding a community of like-minded individuals that share the same passion for an artist's passion for a team, athlete, whatever it may be. And as you said earlier, regarding the different formats for NFTs, that applies to in so many different ways. So I'm trying to not get too specific, but also don't want to overgeneralize either. But yeah, I think it's the connectivity of it, of creating conversations. I always think of it as like having, as a brand, you instantaneously have like the most direct sort of focus group for your strategic directions, where you don't have to have all the answers. Like a lot of times, I'm from the media space, so we would spend hours and days planning a big event or a new show, a new production, and then you roll that out and you kind of have to like cross your fingers and say, let's hope they like this, and hope for the best. But in this case, you can include your core customer base in real time at all your major decisions. And I think there's a lot of power in that for a brand, of having that ongoing communication, that ongoing relationship that stands to benefit both parties.
No, absolutely. And I think it's just, I personally, when people ask me what NFT is, it's very hard to go to technicalities and still keep people inspired and sort of, curious at the same level. So, I had this challenge of trying to put it into like a more human sort of way of explaining it and then translating it into human stories. So to me, like personally, it's like tokenized emotions and experiences, and I feel that that's what you're saying. The connections that people are creating, the emotions and experiences that they are getting from it is pretty kind of different from just the relationship that you would have with the Web 2 brand, right? So I totally agree with you there. And if you look at it, it's interesting. You said connections, and I just thought like the whole hype of the NFTs coincided with the COVID lockdowns, right? And probably that had something to do with it, because people were starving for those experiences. They were starving for those connections, and sort of, the audio, social audio kind of boomed back then. NFTs boomed back then. So it felt like, there was already this need that, they were covering somehow. And Chris Tapp from the audience says Web2 is extracting value from the customers and Web3 is adding value to the customers. And I think that's a really, really good kind of observation. And I totally agree with you on that, Chris. So yeah, well put. Yeah, I mean, NFTs are not, it's not like, they just appeared, right? Even back in those 2017 ICO booms, etc. I remember that Cryptokitties broke Ethereum back then, and they essentially were NFTs. They were one of the first NFTs around, right? Mm-hmm. The interesting thing back then was that although the cryptocurrencies were so popular, there were so many people interested in it, so many people made money, so many people lost money eventually after that. But it was all around the tokens mainly and the ICOs and altcoins. But when Cryptokitties came along and it eventually broke Ethereum and clogged it, many people who were not crypto people were interested in it, and they were actually figuring out how to open those wallets and how to get those kitties and how to breed them, right? And it kind of worked. So like when I'm thinking about mass adoption, like it kind of, partly for a very short period of time, like it somehow on a smaller scale kind of worked way better than with altcoins. And then later on, it slowed down. And now it's sort of with the hype of the NFTs, it feels like when you look at the blockchain space in general, like the quote unquote regular people got into this space through NFTs. And maybe it's because they were around stuff that people understood. They were around music, they were around culture, they were around art, stuff that people get it by itself. And the technology was not the center of the story, the hero of the story, while every other project before used blockchain as their differentiator or used blockchain as their USP and kind of centered their whole kind of story around that we're using this technology. What do you think about that? Like, do you see any, like, is that how you feel as well or not?
Yeah, no, I think that's all right. At least to kind of glean out maybe some of what I heard in there. I think certainly, and I've encountered this with friends and family of my own. I think people come into cryptocurrencies to invest, and people come into NFTs to enjoy. And I always think of it as like NFTs in a way are like digitized culture, and there's a lot of people who are way smarter than me who have been saying that same thing. So that's not necessarily groundbreaking. But it's really just a digitization of existing human behaviors, of experiences, like you said before. And it's things that we're already doing and have been doing since the beginning of time, basically, just in new formats and new mediums. To compare it to the fandom and sports stuff with these behind me, like I see value. This is a signed Magic Johnson jersey. I see value in having this and putting it on my wall. Lakers are my favorite basketball team. He's one of the most iconic NBA players, let alone Lakers of all time.
Definitely,
and I think I feel better having this here and having that as sort of like a part of my identity when someone comes into my home and gets to see my possessions. Now imagine taking that to a sort of metaverse type environment and having something that showcases that same passion within my Ethereum wallet, for example. And I think the hurdle to get over is just being able to assign value to digital objects. I think that's what's foreign as a part of this equation in attributing something that is not real by the definition of physical versus digital, but still having it mean something nonetheless. And the magic
which is why the gamers get it right away, right? Because
100%.
They already kind of, have that mentality by buying skins and everything else, which was digital. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's all about identification. It's pairing your digital presence with your physical presence. And so, like I said, I think it's not a bridge too far for a lot of people because of exactly that. Their behaviors that are the mass populace are already doing in their day-to-day enjoying life. And it's just providing new mechanisms for doing that. I do think that the big hurdle, though, in terms of mainstream adoption, and you mentioned, in the Cryptokitties scenario, if people were then inspired to, download wallets, load their wallets and buy into this project, that that in and of itself is still a bridge too far for a number of people. So it's then you get into the onboarding, you get into the user experience side of things, which I think we can all admit leaves much to be desired in its current form. And I think that's where the things are going to trend, is trying to make improvements there. And certainly like Top Shot and Dapper, what they're doing are making great strides in that advancement. And I think it's only going to become more and more the case. And ultimately, I think the end goal here is to set up a scenario where people buy NFTs without realizing they're buying NFTs. We're not even using the term NFT anymore. This is just a digital asset, and here it is in my wallet, with my profile, wherever that profile exists, that signifies ownership in some way. And I think that's where we have to get to really break through and get to that mainstream point.
No, yeah, I agree with you. I remember, back in the days, even kind of transitioning from cash to completely digital sort of online banking and everything else, without even kind of having that tangible cash in your hands. For many people, it took a while to sort of grasp it and get to that level where they were comfortable kind of just having the card with them, or the Apple Pay, right? So yes, it's just, as you said, it's all about user convenience and experience, and kind of trying to get it as frictionless as possible, because at the moment it's not, right? So
we're seeing it happen in real time. I mean, there's certain behaviors. You mentioned the payment example with Apple Pay. I mean, I just recently got the Apple credit card, which gives me whatever % cash back on Apple Pay, and I haven't looked back. But there's other things like sports event tickets. You have your Ticketmaster, AXS, whatever it be, application, and your ticket is a barcode sitting in that app. Like, why can't that be an NFT? Same for airline tickets. I no longer print my boarding pass. I have it scanned on my Southwest app or whatever it is. Why can't that be an NFT? All these different examples where it's like the sort of the knobs and levers to turn to get to the point where this is on the blockchain and the experience is that much better because of it. It's not much, which makes me excited for the future to see to see these things kind of bridge that gap.
Yeah, it's true. And I think a bit of the right storytelling, I think, is what we need as well. Because at the moment, when you look at the media, right, the way they talk about NFTs, either they scare people away a lot, because as soon as people hear NFTs or crypto, they kind of, oh, no, it's a scam, or it's risky, I don't want to get into it just in case, etc. Or they attracted people, but for the wrong reasons, by highlighting all these big millions in their headlines, right? They don't really talk too much about the real benefits, but they talk about 69 million by Beeple, and then whatever, so many millions by Sotheby, or, even when they talk about Bored Apes, instead of kind of, trying to figure out what it's all about, essentially, they focus mostly about the floor price and how much money every person made by, minting it for $200 or whatever it was back then, right? So I feel like that's another thing that many people just don't get attracted, because they don't read the right stories, or they don't really hear the right stories, because it's still kind of a small group of people who are in it, right? As soon as they get in and experience it, I think that whole, you mentioned culture, that positivity, that whole culture, that kind of, the fact of being among like-minded people, and the fact that, for example, like one-on-one artists and creators, in many cases, they don't really have the people around them in real life who get them, right? They are the weirdos, they are the misfits, they are creating arts that wasn't even accepted by the agents and galleries, because it wasn't within those standards, and etc., right? And now they find so many more people like them who are doing the same thing, etc., and they feel that they find their sweet spot. So I feel like it's just a matter of I don't know, more storytelling than education. Many talk about education, but I personally feel like it's not realistic to expect people to sit and learn about blockchain versus spending that same time watching a Netflix series. I mean, let's be realistic. It's just, it's going to be very hard for someone just, to to position it that way, right? So I don't know. So I guess user experience, the right storytelling, and just as you said, they don't even need to know that it's blockchain, or they don't need to know that it's an NFT. It's just leveling up their existing experiences, and that's it.
Yeah, I'm with you on all fronts. I think that the headline thing is a big issue. Like, it's for, you and I are so deep in this community now. Like, I sometimes have a hard time of sort of removing myself from the echo chamber a little bit, of talking to a bunch of people who know a little bit about what's going on, to kind of suspend your own reality and put yourself in the shoes of someone who's hearing about this stuff for the first time, and you see like Justin Bieber buys Bored Ape for 1.2 million, or someone so fat fingers and sells a $500,000 asset for $1,000, and all these negative stories because they make for sexy headlines. But that doesn't sound like a fun place to be. Like, there's so many. I guess the Bieber one's an example, but it either seems unattainable or unapproachable from the standpoint of safety and investing. So why would I want to get involved? So it is, to your point, it's about gleaning out the stories of the space that give people reason to take part. And I think I have sort of this is about a larger trend that I think we see play out over the coming months, and we're already seeing it happen. But storytelling, I think, is a very important one, because as you look at like the heavyweights of the NFT space as it is today, let's just use Bored Ape Yacht Club as an example. When they came to be a year and change ago, there weren't, besides Top Shot, there really weren't any mainstream brands getting involved in the space, and it was a bit of a blank canvas in terms of the IP, and that allowed for organic, grassroots, homegrown IP to come up natively out of the space. We're now starting to see the opposite of that, where every major IP holder is thinking to themselves, like, okay, how do I take part in this? How do I create NFTs? How do I get into the metaverse? And so on. And the nature of the beast, whether it's good or bad, I don't have an opinion either way, is that these IP holders have about a decades-long head start in terms of creating fandom, resonating with people, having people build their identity around the IP that they love, whether that be Marvel, whether that be my favorite sports team, all these other key players. So I think we're kind of coming to a point of inflection, in a sense, in the space of particularly around storytelling, where if I am creating new IP that no one necessarily resonates with yet, how do I get people to care about that? And how do I get people to invest in that? Not necessarily from a monetary point of view, but from a timing point of view, and spend time in the community, spend time building, spend time participating. And I think that's going to be more and more of a difficult thing to do. But to your point, I think that has to be done through storytelling it's in a traditional sense, we may call it brand building, but I would refer to it as storytelling here, in creating narratives around characters, around a vision, around a community, what that community stands for, how they identify, not only amongst themselves, but to others, socially, physically, digitally, through every other medium. And I think that's where the real power is going to be. And I think that's where we're going to see the projects that come out of the NFT space that may not be rooted in traditional IP. That's where they're going to win, is being able to build those stories and build them well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And it's interesting because we have read so many different things about Bored Ape Yacht Club and why they succeeded and how they've done it and all that stuff. But the interesting thing is, no one, at least I haven't heard many people talk about the fact that, first of all, they were probably one of the first ones who actually had a certain level of storytelling into the whole kind of project positioning, and they did it pretty well. But what's even more important was that in their story, the hero was the actual potential token buyers, right? So it wasn't a story about them or about their project or about the vision or about the future that they were building. It was a story that deeply resonated with the people who were gonna buy the apes, and creating that relationship and identification with their apes. Everyone felt that they were the apes because it was tapping into this, kind of hidden desire of why people were aping into this whole story to become rich, to become, so rich that they didn't have to do anything else. And, the whole story resonated so well with the audience that it was very tailored and created just for them. And I think
that's, I just want to, sorry, really quick, like that's the culture. Like that is like a digitization and a tokenization and a storytelling experience around the culture of crypto. And like that just kind of is like the case in point of our conversation thus far, is like, I think that's why they've done so well, is they've managed to take that culture, create a project around it, and then storytell that around that culture to find success. Sorry.
Exactly, and that's why I'm thinking that for big brands, very often when they try to enter this space, the problems that they are getting usually is that they don't get the culture. Very often, like when it doesn't work because they are trying to. Yeah, I mean they do GMs and they do friends and all that stuff, but it just doesn't feel like they get it, right? So I think that that's another thing that, when brands come in, it's kind of, they probably need to spend a bit of time and to experience that whole thing in order for that kind of culture and the way they demonstrate that they are part of this ecosystem actually comes organically and naturally, and doesn't really feel a bit cringy and awkward, right? So it's just
I think of it as like authenticity in those scenarios. And I always, whoever I'm talking with, clients, brands, and so on, it's always, it can be such a knee-jerk reaction to do something. And you may think that you're going to miss the boat if you don't take action. But I always encourage brands to just participate. Not necessarily not participate in terms of creating a collection or doing whatever else, but just like be present in the space. And I think like that in and of itself brings a sense of authenticity. Like you're here not necessarily to monetize, you're not here to grow your customer base, you're here just to enjoy. And it's all about delivering value. And I think ultimately the brands that win in this space are going to be the ones that enter the space authentically and do so in a way that drives value to the community or other communities, wherever they may be. And I think we can, in our heads, we can all think of some who have done that well and some who have done that not well. And I think it's going to become more and more of a trend in the coming months as the space continues to grow.
Yeah, and I think the difference will be, the gap will become bigger and bigger between the ones who will actually get it and integrate well, and the ones who won't but will still try to do it their Web2 way, bringing in their own rules into this thing, right? So yeah, I agree with you. So when we're looking into this whole space, and it's kind of it develops as well, right? Like this space about 6 months ago was completely different than it is at the moment, and it keeps progressing and it changes. Like probably if even Bored Apes, if they launched now and did what they did from the very beginning, it might not have worked that well as when they did it, right? So things are really changing. The requirements are like, people get these experiences, they already expect more from the projects that are coming than a year ago and all that stuff, right? So when you look into how things develop, do you feel like there will be new ways of doing things? Because at the moment, like, there has been a quite long period of Me Too strategies, like, looking around, oh, these things started working, let's all do that, like, 10K, 0.08 mint, let's just do it. Animals, okay, let's do animals. Women, let's do women, or whatever, right? There have been certain trends that people were following and copying from each other, and it worked up to a certain point, and then people start getting immune, and then it kind of flattens out, and then someone thinks of something different, and then it kind of peaks from there. So what do you think? Like, is it this whole PFP 10K cartoon animal female, whatever it is it here to stay, or it needs to develop into something more in order for it to survive?
Yeah, I first off, I feel attacked having a wallet littered with like cute animal PFP pump and dump projects that I managed to not get enough of in late part of last year, or whatever that window was, where that was the hot new thing off the back of Cool Cats. But no, I mean I agree entirely, and it's funny how we see anytime anytime there's a speculative market, which I think we're in right now, you end up with opportunists. And so opportunists will see trends, they will capitalize on trends, and people will be harmed in the process. So, we've seen about every trend in the book, and I would say the cycle goes, on a month to month basis, what the hot trend is then. It was, female character projects. It was cute animal PFPs. There was like an anime run after Azuki for a while there. So these things are going to continue to happen, I think. And I don't necessarily have the right answer, and that's the magic of this now. Is you don't have. I mean, like you said, Bored Ape's been around for a little over a year. Like, you don't really have a large data set of benchmark information to assess off of to know like what will succeed and what not, what won't succeed. And really, we probably on a week to week basis are seeing new things that do well that no one's ever seen before. Like it's innovative. And that's why it's hard to answer that question, because like, as I sit here, I don't know what the next big thing is going to be, or who and what is going to end up succeeding in the long run.
But I think that's the magic of it, right? You never get bored, because it's always something new and always something unexpected, which is really, really cool, because, otherwise it will be just the same thing over and over again. So it's
innovation is the key. And that's, so if we think about who's going to succeed or fail in the long run, I think it's about innovating. It's about being different. It's about providing value in ways that people haven't done previously. And you think about it too, just in the current state of the market, just facing some harsh realities, there's not a lot of people that are participating in this stuff right now. And if you look at like the sales volume and start to project that on a per user basis across the ecosystem of wallets, you start to realize like a lot of it's just, everyone kind of just trading money back and forth. And all the while, like, you don't have necessarily the astronomical growth in NFT usership that we saw previously, but there's, a dozen or dozen plus new projects launching per day. Like, that just by the nature of supply, demand, and available liquidity, that's not sustainable. So how are you going to differentiate yourself in the market in the medium to long term to be that successful project that I think every project founder at least should consider themselves in having a long-term vision and wanting to ultimately succeed? But it's becoming more and more difficult, I think, and that only stands to be exacerbated as mainstream brands enter the space. Because it's the nice part about that is you're going to bring in some outside liquidity from established fandoms, but inherently there's going to be the core community that's also looking to get involved and do some flipping around those projects and see it as like as an investment opportunity. So that's a long non-answer, but my thought is a part of it all. It's a tricky time right now, and I always implore any new projects that I talk to, like, put your heart and soul of focus into innovation and doing something that's different and outside the box. Because if you try to build a strategy of like, we're going to do this but do it better, like, I don't think that's a win in the long term.
No, I agree with you. And I think that's the beauty of this whole space, because it's so new that there are no rules, and you can experiment, and you can sort of, set out your own rules, or, come up with your own ways, and sort of, find your own path. And there are so many different possibilities that there is no one way to success. There are so many other ways to do this. And in terms of liquidity, it's even way, way less when we're talking about one-on-one artists, right? It's like, because most of the volume goes to these speculative assets that people are kind of hoping that are going to bring them Lambos and stuff like that, right? So obviously and since I mentioned one-on-one artists, there has been this trend recently among them. Many were, let's say, frustrated because of the fact that even their audiences were expecting utility from their one-on-one NFTs, right? So, like, what's the utility of it? And in their case, the argument is like, there is no utility. Like, the art itself is the utility. Me as an artist is the utility. Like, I don't really need to build on top of it, right? So do you feel like any NFT actually needs a utility, or is it just like, I don't know, like this whole requirement towards one-on-one artists and utility related stuff? Like, do you think it's valid, or it's just about just copying and following this requirements from other areas that
Yeah.
kind of come into the one-on-one as well, just as a
Sure.
blanket statement.
Yeah, I mean it's another complicated question with an answer that we don't have time for. But I think, to me, I think that, you know, any NFT could have utility, but not every NFT should have utility. And by that I mean, if you want to compare it to traditional art, I think no one has bought, for the most part, by my understanding, no one buys classical art for the purposes of getting utility out of it. Like, utility is the art itself, it's the enjoyment of it, it's having a statement piece that sits in your living room that you can, when you have guests over, you can converse over, show them as a symbol of pride of something that you hold ownership of. And again, this is back to the original part of the conversation here. Like, that screams NFT to me. So that in and of itself should be interpreted as utility. I think by the nature of these 10K PFP type projects, and you know, the how much of a buzzword utility has become, it's a false expectation to apply that sort of assessment to that format being the one-of-one art, when it comes to NFTs. And certainly I think artists, I don't say, I almost want to take back what I said earlier about certain NFTs should or should not have utility. I think it should ultimately be up to the artist. Like, I think buyers should not have an expectation of utility, nor should artists feel a requirement of utility. But at the same time, if there's utility that they can provide, then all the better. And that's it. Ultimately, then it's for the market to determine what the value of that is. I personally, like, I think it's a silly argument to say on any fronts that a one-of-one artist, like in a more traditional sense, should be providing utility. I think that's just absurd. But at the same time, like, I, as an NFT buyer, like, I'm not buying a ton of one-of-one art. And not to say that I'm like utility chasing, but I've just never been a big art collector. So I don't assign value to an NFT that's art driven and doesn't have utility attached to it. So I can go on my way and say, thanks, but no thanks. But I do see the value in that for other people. So, you know, not all NFTs are created equal. I think it's on a buyer to buyer, artist to artist basis.
And it's not for everyone. Yeah, it's not for everyone as well. Even 10 PFP projects, like, you know, they too have different vibes, and, you know, different people like different ones. So I totally get that. Let's talk a little bit about, I mean, we all love this whole story about decentralization, right? But when you look at the real picture, I feel like from the technical perspective, it's easy to reach to a certain level of decentralization. But from the human behavior perspective, when you're looking at the big influencers who can sort of, you know, move the markets with several tweets, or when you look into, let's say, what Yuga Labs have become in terms of how massive they are at the moment, and now they acquired the CryptoPunks, and, you know, that whole investment, like the huge kind of amount that came into, like, the whole thing kind of felt a little bit like overwhelming to the market. Like, it's a very big presence and loads of resources compared to other projects. How, like, I mean, would you say that this decentralization is a really nice theory, but at the moment it's more of an illusion than a reality?
I say, which is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek thing to say, but I think of it as the fact that people want decentralization until they have decentralization. And I think there's a lot of responsibility on a personal level that comes with decentralization, and with great power comes great responsibility, in terms of, yes, it's amazing to consider a world where you hold full ownership, autonomy, privacy over your money, over your data, over your NFTs and whatever else you sort of hold in this wallet, going down the road of this example. But when you hold that control, there's no one there to save you. And we've seen time and time again, whether it be scams, hacks, you know, whatever else, people get burned in the process. And I think there's an element of user experience here. You know, it's a bad comparison, but if I were to send a letter with cash in it and I write down the wrong address and that goes to someone else and someone gets the cash, then that cash is gone forever. And it's a bit the same here, and not just, if I have outflows of Ethereum that I'm sending to someone, I get the address wrong and it's gone forever and I kind of cry foul. But these aren't foreign concepts, they're just concepts that we're not used to, especially when you consider the money changing hands on a regular basis in this space. So I think it's about getting the experience right. I think it goes back to education of making sure people understand. And there's a lot of people in the space that are trying to do this and understand the importance of hardware wallets and not trusting people that reach out to you on Discords and whatnot to send them money or click their links or sign contracts. And there's some psychology there around, you mentioned influencers of seeing a pump happening and then trying to get involved as quickly as possible. And then it turns out that was a scam and you kind of get blinded by the FOMO a little bit. So it's a hurdle that we're trying to jump over. I'm personally I know that the idea of decentralization is super sexy. I think that it's more sexy in an idea than it is in practice. I'm not a big decentralization maxi. I think that there's a middle ground of some sort to be achieved. And I think I kind of have my feet in both camps of I like to be decentralized for certain things, but then I like a safety net in other things. So yeah, I think we're still trying to find that balance, but I think it is a balance. I would not be a proponent as it exists today of going full decentralization, I guess. But in certain instances, it's certainly a nice thing to have.
It's interesting you said that, because I have a feeling that it's like if you look at centralized versus decentralized, and you start moving the scale, the more decentralized the platform is, the less user friendly it becomes somehow, right? So it's always a trade-off between okay, you want mass adoption, but at the same time you want to be completely decentralized, but then in between there is this user experience kind of thing that doesn't really fit with completely decentralized things at the moment as of yet. So it's a whole complex thing. And the interesting thing was I was looking recently, that whole Bitcoin and ownership and that whole idea where everything started from. Now there are banks that are providing a custody of Bitcoin service, which to me is oh my God, it's completely the opposite of where it all started and why it all started. But some people just are so afraid of that responsibility of holding that Bitcoin and just, I don't know, making mistakes or whatever, that they actually are okay with keeping the Bitcoin in the bank. I mean, under the bank's custody or whatever.
Yeah.
So to me, it depends who needs what. Maybe we just think that everyone needs decentralization, but in reality, not everyone is so keen on that, which is why, centralized exchanges like Coinbase and Kraken and many others are doing so well, because they have probably found that right balance between user friendliness, where pretty much anyone can actually buy a Bitcoin with Coinbase. It's a no-brainer, right? And also kind of peace of mind kind of thing, which is peace of mind for some people, but those who are very deep into the whole thing, maybe the opposite. I don't know, but but it's a tricky question, and it's always kind of, I just feel like sometimes many people just knowing that this is a very appealing story, they cover up what they do, with that story, while even they know that it's not really about that,
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. And I think
OpenSea claimed it was decentralized since quite a while, and then they had to rephrase their copyright. So it's a little bit,
Yeah, I think the answer lies somewhere in the middle. And I would not want almost the requirement of decentralization to be the reason why people don't get involved in the space, because of the risks involved, because of the bad actors that look to take advantage of that. So I think it's not a great example, but it's like having different banking options. I think of it as I have sort of a menu of what I'm willing to engage with as some function of preference, somewhat function of risk acceptance, of based upon user experience, where I should be able to choose, do I want the sort of the risk of decentralization, so to speak, and having full control of my assets, or do I not care that much and I'm okay keeping them with someone else who has a degree of control, which has its own risk included with it, but there also comes with security. And I think that in and of itself, to a degree, is a bit a part of the Web3 ethos, in a weird, ironic way, of having a choice, of having the autonomy to be able to choose either or.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a beautiful thing.
No, I totally agree with you. So in that case, like, one side of that whole decentralization story is DAOs versus centralized brands. Because both can be Web3 brands, right? In both structures can be Web3 native, or we have Web2, as you mentioned, Web2 brands coming into the Web3 space. So there will probably be like 3 versions of, like, I don't know, like completely decentralized DAOs versus Web3 companies that were born as Web3 but are centralized kind of, corporate brands. And then you have like, the Web2 brands that come into this space and sort of, integrate somehow Web3 into their business. So even there, it seems like there is going to be a choice of which projects you would like to be involved with, right?
Yeah. DAOs are a funny one. This is another scenario where perhaps I'm not a decentralization maxi. I think DAOs are great in theory. I'm a big fan of like goal-based DAOs. Like I see DAOs as the new generation of crowdsourcing, where you have, whether it's buying the Constitution or buying a sports team or buying a golf course, like it's a bunch of people who believe in a goal, believe in a mission to join together, and then should you achieve that outcome, then hold ownership over that outcome in some capacity. I do think some DAOs, though, if not ran properly, can become wildly inefficient, where like if everyone has a seat at the table, no one has a seat at the table. Like not only in terms of the lead time of making decisions, like the nature of operating a successful business requires a lot of day-to-day operations. And if you're leaving everything up to a collective of thousands of people, like is that efficient? And then as well, I think there's a lack of education that goes into those decisions. I think some people may just be clicking random buttons or voting based upon their personal best interest versus the best interest of the DAO at large to make their decisions on a vote by vote basis. So I think there's a balance there. Like, again, I'm not like a proponent of like DAO everything. Like we should get rid of the traditional shareholder structure and give everyone ownership and voting rights, which by the way is not necessarily a new thing. Like shareholder votes exist, and then now they have like a delegate system in some DAOs, but isn't that kind of just a board of directors? So it's just like kind of
it's still, I think people are still trying to figure out like the best ways of dealing with DAOs, because like even if you call it a DAO, but like majority of the tokens are with the team, like is it actually a DAO? Like there are many ways to look into this, and like it doesn't really matter what you call it. It's just about how you actually structure it and how it actually operates. And I feel like it's very, very challenging to launch a completely decentralized DAO from the very beginning. It probably needs a bit of transition period or whatever. I don't know, but that's another kind of completely new thing that people are figuring out that didn't exist before, and now it's kind of people try to understand what's the best way to move with that forward. Because you mentioned crowdfunding, and that's true actually, because back in the days we had ICOs, which were like really good mechanism of bypassing the VCs and sort of crowdfunding and directly getting people on board to help you build the project, right, to fund your project. And then again, greed and human nature sort of completely screwed up the whole thing, and then no one trusted in ICOs anymore, and it didn't work. Then we tried several different other ways of funding mechanisms with tokenized funding mechanisms like IEOs and STOs. Apparently they didn't work out well either, and now it feels like DAOs are like the next level of that kind of progression, and NFTs as well, obviously, for the projects. So it feels like now these are the two options, but still it's kind of we're still more
and And it's you. I mean, you're citing examples from a few years ago, and I think if we were to come back to this conversation in 3 to 5 years, we would point to DAOs as like that was that era. Not to say the DAOs are going to go away, but I think once you start to look at everything happening in the space right now as a means to an end rather than the means, and everything happening for better or worse is meant to be building blocks for learning and building on top of to not only talked about going mainstream, but just ensure the success of this movement in the long term. I personally find myself a lot more forgiving. Like it just we can't see that today is like, all right, here we are. This is Web3. Like this is meant to be the stepping stones to getting to this eventual reality and whatever reality that may be. And I think the onus is on us as the community to use these learnings to build better as we go along, which makes for really exciting times.
I totally agree with you. And we're getting close to 1 hour. So I guess, I would like to wrap up with what do you hope for? Like, I'm sure you're going to stick around to this space. I mean, I'm definitely going to be, because I lived through the crypto winter without leaving the space. And I saw many people do leave the space because of that. Right. And I feel like, I don't think we're in the winter, in that type of winter, and I'm not even sure that it's going to happen to the NFT space specifically, at least in that shape and form. But I'm sure that when things cool down a little bit, many people will also leave, because those who came just for the hype or for the sake of the money, probably, or those who were getting funded for their startups because it was like a hyped sphere, they may stop just being interested into building something as well. Who knows? But since we will be around, what's your hope in terms of what would you like the space to be like in the future? Like what is that ultimate dream of yours in terms of what would you like it to be?
Yeah, it's a great question. My hope would be that we no longer associate NFTs as investment mechanisms. To go back to, I always keep going back to this, but the sports example, there are so many things that I hold value in that I go to purchase not for the purposes of selling it more for a higher dollar amount down the road, but because I like them, because I make them a part of my identity, and because that means something to me and I find value in that. And I think NFTs stand to be a great mechanism for doing that. That's not what gets headlines, it's not what gets attention, but I think it's an important human behavior that NFTs stand to make better by the nature of their connection to digital presence and everything like that. So I think it's a separation of investing with NFTs. And I think that's, like, I would say conservatively, 70 to 80% of people get involved with the space today because of the potential to make money. But I hope that we get to the point where people are engaging with NFTs for the purposes of enjoyment, for participating in their passions, for getting closer to the things they love, the people they love, the communities they love, not for the purposes of being able to make a buck along the way. And again, that's not abnormal human behavior. We all go to fan meetups, we wear jerseys around, we go to concerts, we go to meet and greets, whatever it is. So it's just a matter of digitizing that and creating that user experience in the metaverse, it's in the digital world, that builds value outside of just an ROI. Yeah, no, I think that's the way to more sustainable and kind of, more long-term sort of space that will stay for and keep developing. So that's, I'm with you in there. So fingers crossed, and that we'll see loads of real builders that would keep on building no matter what, and the innovation that we mentioned would be around, and then we will end up getting surprised over and over again, which is like a super cool thing. It's never a boring day in this space, which is super cool. So that's for sure. So, and to answer your question, I don't know this question, but I will not be going anywhere no matter what happens. I'm always back for more abuse, so get used to seeing me.
Okay, that's it. So who knows? Maybe like in a few months we'll do another session like this, and we'll kind of
Would love that.
revisit what we spoke about. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time. So I'll just it was really nice to talk to you. We'll stick after I stop the live stream. But yeah, everyone who watched, thank you very much. Those who left comments, will just go back and revisit the comments and reply to them. Obviously, I saw several coming. I just didn't want to stop the flow. So thank you very much, Sam, you, and everyone else who watched. I really appreciate your time and attention, guys. And see you in the next episode. Take care,
Awesome.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you for having me. Thanks, everyone.